Dear Naruto Lemon fans, I'm thrilled to invite all of you to my Boosty channel, where you can enjoy exclusive Naruto Lemon scenes in a comfortable and supportive community. Choose from various subscription tiers, from Mini Lemon to God Lemon, and gain access to unique content tailored just for our fans. Plus, subscribers to over Naruto Lemon and God Lemon will receive special mentions in my videos. Support my channel and dive deeper into the world of Naruto today. Dare. As a child, if anyone asked me what I wanted to be, I'd answer that I wanted to be Hokage, until my childish brain grasped the implications of that. I once saw piles of papers on the village chief's desk. From then on, whenever I was asked the same question, I'd answer without a twinge of conscience that I'd be Shikamaru Nara's wife. Why? It's all so simple. His shadow technique was simply amazing. And if I'm lucky enough to become the boss of this place, I'll have someone to dump my paperwork on. The groom, admittedly, had no idea I was a miracle, but that was his problem. As for me, I'd already made up my mind and was moving toward my goal like a feral, starving ninja at his breakfast/lunch/dinner, underline as appropriate. It all started with what I thought at the time was that I would quietly appear in front of Nara so that he would get used to my frequent presence around him. No, I'm not smart enough to come up with this idea myself, it's just that sometimes my locator ears were monstrously large. Later, of course, they explained to me the full error of my actions. Oh, are you interested? Okay, I'll tell you. Being a severely uneducated child, I had no idea how to disguise myself, so my protruding crown stood out too much. It could have been my butt, but after a few kicks and a couple of black eyes from some pugnacious boys, I guarded my rear end like the apple of my eye. But that's beside the point. Shikamaru was practically disappearing from the constant noise those idiotic boys were making. And I, cursing at the brawlers like crazy, I overheard it at the local bar, was trying to beat the crap out of them, calming my nerves in the process. So, having declared myself a hunt for Pineapple, as I nicknamed him for his spiky hair, I lost miserably in the first round, leaving me with bruised knees and scraped knuckles. On top of that, I was getting a beating from the villagers and the Hokage. 1-0. Comrade Shikamaru. After that, I stubbornly decided to be an eyesore to my dear fellow villagers so I could finally learn how to disguise myself skillfully. It was painful, it was scary, but at least I was adding to my little phrasebook of curse words almost every day. You have to look for the positive in everything. I told myself, and failed miserably during the second round, when I was picking flowers in the garden of the most evil old woman in the village. You might ask why I did it? It was, again, quite simply. She had the most gorgeous flowers I'd ever seen in my life. I wanted my future fiancé to see that I appreciated beauty. Anyway, after that incident, I couldn't sit still for the next 3 days. So I skipped classes and missed seeing Ino, who was always shooting Sasukebaka glances at him with interest when he, the laziest student in the class, managed to solve some super difficult problem in no time. I honestly missed that moment, and later I was terribly angry at myself for it. Ino, too, so the girl had the misfortune of swimming in the local river, slipping right in front of her idol, and then completely embarrassing herself during training. She'll learn not to lick someone else's arse, I thought, and with a deafening roar, I lost the third round, too, without having time to do anything useful. The thing was, Nara had already figured out the reason for the strange things happening to the girl. So, when she ran off the training field in tears, I felt the heavy gaze of black eyes on my back. A chill ran down my spine, and the victorious smile slid from my face. I think it was at that moment that I realized I'd given up on myself. After that, I made no attempt to fix everything for a long time. And there wasn't much time. First, there was the team assignment. I so wanted to get into Pineapple, but I got the Idiot Avenger, then the Chunin exam, training with the perverted hermit, Akatsuki. In short, a lot happened, and not always was it good. And then I somehow got lost in the shuffle of pre-war and war days. I dissolved in the blood of my enemies. I burned myself with the fox's chakra. It was as if I no longer existed. I forgot I had ever existed. But nothing lasts forever. The war was over. Thousands died. Tens of thousands were crippled both mentally and physically. And I, like an animal, hid in the farthest, darkest corner and licked my wounds. You know, the scorched and devastated village of Yuzushiogakure turned out to be surprisingly familiar. It was as if the barely surviving walls themselves provided warmth and comfort, healing the wounded soul. And there was a strange silence all around. You won't believe it, of course, but one bloody evening, amidst the silent ruins, I decided my time here was over. I was a superfluous element in this universe rebuilt on blood-soaked soil. And then he found me. We talked all night, and for the first time, I said nothing. After that, I kept quiet a lot. He told me about the new hokage, about the restoration of the village, about mutual acquaintances. He told me everything that had happened during those 2 months of self-imposed imprisonment and asked me to return. He asked not of a superfluous and nearly broken element, but of a girl. A girl who, if she wished, could enter the village gates arm in arm with him. For the first time in my life, someone spoke to me like a human being. A human being, you understand, not a demon or a vessel for one. I burst into tears then, shamefully. I squatted down and sobbed like a baby. He stood next to me, silently smoking. That silence, which he allowed me to enjoy, was what married us. We both felt it. Inexplicably, magically, wonderfully. I actually walked through the village gates arm in arm with him. No one recognized me. Just before entering, I chopped off my lush locks of hair with a blunt kunai. He said nothing, but deep in his dark eyes, I saw disapproval. Understanding, but still disapproval. We celebrated our wedding quietly, with only family members in attendance. I remember his pure black hakama with the family crest, his unpromising yet incredibly familiar gaze, and his warm hands. Our wedding didn't follow all the traditions, but there was still the sense of wonder that accompanies every such event. Once, in my earliest childhood, I caught a glimpse of a beautiful girl in snow-white robes. She seemed to have stepped out of the pages of a book, from heaven itself. That day, I was swept up in the same whirlwind of emotions. And then came the same leisurely wedding night, where each of us revealed our entire being to the other. Who knows what came over me, but amidst those leisurely yet deep kisses, I asked why me. He smiled softly and, without ceasing his movements, whispered into my lips the very secrets I still hold in my heart. Feeling him within me, gently bending from his leisurely movements, feeling his calloused hands on my body, I inhaled his words. I dissolved into him, realizing that he was already there, inside me, and nothing in life could tear him away. I heard about the little golden-haired demon who kept me awake, about the follies of a child with a brush in one hand and a bouquet of the most beautiful flowers in the other, about a girl whose jealousy nearly drowned her in the depths of anger. I listened and realized that I had fallen for his hook like a little goldfish who decided that she herself had given the fisherman a chance to become happier. Even though I was caught, I've never regretted it. Especially now, when my heart and fingers tremble treacherously, and the baby living within me is calmed by the soft whisper of its father. Shikamaru first saw her on the playground. They were about 5, and even then, the golden-haired girl was already skillfully shouting something distinctly uncultured at her equally wild opponent. It was for this very reason that the young Nara disliked being in places where many children congregated. The shouting, din, and senseless running around were exhausting and prevented him from getting a good night's sleep. Much later, looking back on those years, the brown-haired boy reflects with irony that, even from an early age, he had noticed the problematic nature of the people around him. But he always considered, and probably always will consider, her the most problematic element in his life. Uzumaki Naruto combined all the traits that Shikamaru found most unpleasant. She was loud, fickle, and made stupid and inappropriate jokes. She was charming. It seemed he first thought this insufferable creature might be endearing when she gazed with a quiet admiration unusual for her character at Shino's new beetle and raised her blazing eyes to the proud boy. Perhaps, in his entire life, Aburame never felt so proud of himself and his insects as he did at that moment. Perhaps the ability to genuinely admire others' interests, strengths, or abilities, as opposed to mere envy, always distinguished Naruto from ordinary people. However, this is not what we are talking about now. It seems only the deaf have not heard of a young prodigy, for whom even the simplest techniques proved beyond their capabilities, striving to become hokage. But even if such people had existed in the village at that time, the restless Naruto would have surely found them and explained with all her might that she, and no one else, would become the village's most powerful ninja, and that everyone would finally appreciate her. Her lofty aspirations were looked upon with condescension and sneered nastily behind her back. Some muttered spitefully about being a monster and hurled insults at her. Uzumaki wasn't upset, at least outwardly, and pursued her goal with the stubbornness of a donkey. In his entire life, Shikamaru never saw another person willing to smash their forehead, or indeed every bone in their body, just to achieve something. Probably no one who knew Naruto did. Although this is not exactly what I would like to talk about. Nara doesn't know exactly when things went wrong. One day, he simply saw a blonde head poking out from a nearby bush and an incoherent muttering. At that moment, Uzumaki seemed intent on following him. He couldn't explain the blonde's presence anywhere else he went. Nor did he need to. At that moment, he still didn't care about the girl's latest senseless antics, as long as she didn't disturb his sleep. Which, of course, she did at the first opportunity. However, after just a few days, Shikamaru realized something very simple, yet somehow barely noticed before. Naruto was a girl too. Although still small and unable to utilize the abilities bestowed upon her by nature, she was a girl, not a boy foolishly dressed up. It seemed that, by coincidence, that day he had witnessed her latest outburst directed at the adult shinobi. The brown-haired man didn't even bother to listen. Naruto could shout with equal impetuosity about becoming Hokage or about ramen being the finest creation of humanity. But at some point, the shouting stopped, and the next moment, he heard the pop of a technique working. Who had pulled him to see what had happened? He doesn't know, but he will remember the burning feeling of shame and embarrassment for the rest of his life. Naruto, her, Uzumaki had used henge to transform into herself, several years older, but only without clothes. It was a shock for a rapidly maturing body. Subsequently, hormones did their job, and the first wet dreams in Shikamaru's life happened exclusively with one well-known blonde. It seemed he couldn't even talk to her normally for a few days. Then he saw Mrs. Hiyori, a nasty old woman who bought flowers from Yamanaka for her garden, chasing Naruto around the yard with a stick, and he calmed down. Temporarily, of course, but the blonde no longer seemed distant and familiar with adult life. And her cries about how it was all for the sake of her future husband were funny and even a little endearing. And what was also endearing was that she sometimes blushed if he caught her spying on him. And, of course, problematic. So Shikamaru accepted that Naruto liked him. And, in principle, he was willing to let them start dating in the near future. Life made its own adjustments to their lives. After Naruto's strange and completely uncharacteristic behavior, when she tried to spite Ino just because she'd spared a few minutes of her time to show interest in him, they hadn't spoken for a long time. On one side, there were new teams to get used to, on the other, training for the Chunin exams. And then the Uchiha left. And from that moment, the Nara realized that if he didn't do something, Naruto would fixate on Sasuke and make him the main goal of his life. Shikamaru couldn't allow that. He wasn't yet ready to tell himself the reason for such judgments, but he undoubtedly knew it. However, even here, things did not go as planned. Uzumaki left with the Sannin Jiraiya on a journey that lasted 3 long years. And upon her return, although she remained herself, she was no longer the foolish and flighty girl who had taken an interest in him. It took him a long 6 months to rekindle his embarrassment and even his slight attempts to interest him. It felt like Naruto had somehow forgotten she was a normal 16-year-old girl, for whom it was normal to hang out with guys and fall in love. With each passing day, she immersed herself more and more in her training, pursuing strength as if she had a premonition of the horror that would come later. And she was increasingly determined to bring that dark-haired bastard back to the village. It was almost the end, almost defeat, but not complete, and that offered a chance. A chance that shattered when the war began. It was neither the time nor the place for relationships nor for attempts to build anything. People were dying, and so was Naruto. With every failed mission, every person not saved, every hope dashed. Uzumaki took on more than either of them dared. Years later, Shikamaru blames himself for it. For not being there, for not providing the support he needed. They all lost too much in that war. And he almost lost her. When the war ended, and the survivors were able to count their losses, mourn the dead, and return to work, they all suddenly realized Naruto was gone. Not among the corpses, though they would have certainly noticed her death, but she was also not among the living. The fifth was about to send a search party, to rouse almost the entire alliance. Only the Uchiha's quiet, empty voice stopped her. He spoke of calm, a desire for silence, and an immense weariness. This phenomenal bond between Naruto and Sasuke was an astonishing thing, inexplicable and unbreakable, and therefore deeply hated. There was no reason to trust him, but no one could afford to devote all their efforts solely to searching for Naruto. So a small group, led by Shikamaru, was assembled and sent after the restless blonde. Finding her wasn't difficult for Nara. He remembered how enthusiastically she spoke of the Uzumaki clan and how she wanted to visit the village ruins. But being there with such a crowd would have been a mistake. And he didn't want to talk to her in front of anyone else. They languished like this for several weeks, about 2 months to be exact. Management was forced to recall the group. A few days later, he looked at her haggard face, her dull eyes, and scolded himself for not having come sooner. Mistake after mistake, Lord Nara. With Uzumaki, you can only do it once and for all, or not at all. Shikamaru couldn't remember that conversation being the hardest and easiest he'd ever had. News about the village, about acquaintances, stupid jokes, anything but silence, not that heavy, empty look in her eyes, as if nothing in this world mattered to her anymore. He couldn't remember what he'd said that had allowed the blockade to collapse and Naruto to look at him meaningfully. It seemed like a simple request to return, almost a plea. She cried for a long time. And he had absolutely no idea what to do. Shikamaru always considered girls' tears to be a major problem. Naruto's tears were almost a lethal weapon. Silence seemed the best solution. They walked back in silence, silently looking into the eyes of Hotake Kakashi, to whom the fifth had delegated her duties, and silently walking toward his house, because her decrepit apartment had never been restored after the battle with pain. For about a week, Naruto didn't utter a word. She moved like a shadow, looking around as if seeing houses and their everyday lives for the first time, tugging at her unevenly cut hair and remaining silent. Hirono even mentioned at one point undergoing a medical examination, but the suddenly cold gaze of his blue eyes cut her off. Brown-haired Naruto didn't interfere. He guessed that returning to the village's emotional life after the quiet and dead Uzumaki would be quite a difficult experience for her. 3 weeks later, Shikamaru said that he wanted Naruto as his wife. What was surprising was that Naruto refused to invite anyone to the wedding. Nara didn't care. The most important person in his life would be there anyway. The celebration was quiet. Yoshino quickly wiped away tears from the corners of her eyes. A couple of elderly men close to the family offered congratulations. The bride herself smiled absent-mindedly, looking straight at him with her impossible blue eyes, seemingly unable to believe she was sitting in a wedding dress at her own wedding. Years later, Shikamaru thinks Naruto is the best thing that ever happened to him. And although at times he really wishes his wife were a little less problematic, that doesn't stop him from loving her and sighing heavily every time she falls asleep on her desk well past midnight.